Euphoria. While some people hear that and think of the 2019 TV show, I instead think of the visual novel by Clock Up. While I never ended up making a video on it, which will change whenever I get around to a reread, it remains one of the best visual novels I have ever read, and I've always said that anyone who can handle its extreme content should read it, because it utilizes these extremely disturbing and graphic scenes to tell a deep and nuanced story that you just won't find anywhere else. Even though the viewers of my channel have only ever heard me mention Euphoria offhand a handful of times, you should know that I absolutely love it and it genuinely means a lot to me. Well, Euphoria ended up getting adapted into an anime. Read between the lines there, I can't say the word this early in the video. And it does not have the best reputation. Quite the opposite, in fact. But of course, I had to take a look for myself to see just how bad it really is. And it's bad. Like, really bad. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's impossible to even follow if you haven't read the visual novel beforehand. So in this video, I'm going to share this abomination with you, but I'm going to do my best to not spoil the visual novel as much as possible. While the adaptation does end up showing a bunch of spoilery stuff, including events from the true route, most of it is nonsensical without context, which they do not provide, by the way. So you should be fine to watch this video without having read the visual novel, but you may want to read it first. So to start us off, I need to explain the premise of Euphoria, and this applies to both the visual novel and the adaptation. The protagonist Keisuke wakes up in a mysterious facility alongside some of his classmates and his teacher. In order to escape, he must participate in a series of games where he's forced to do unpleasant things to his companions, with the penalty for failure or refusal being a painful death. Basically a sexual version of the Saw movies. There are two main points of conflict, at least at first. There's the obvious one of overcoming the game and the questions of who's behind it and why. Then there's Keisuke's internal struggles. While he is a morally good person, he just so happens to have a strong fetish for domination and sexual sadism. So a big part of the story is the fact that he's being forced to engage in his rather extreme kinks with reluctant partners. So he's actually enjoying himself, but it inspires a great deal of self-loathing, so there's a man versus self conflict there. There's more stuff that comes into play later in the story, but that's all we need for now. The Euphoria hentai is only 6 episodes, so I think the best way to do this is to look at each of them individually. And for obvious reasons, the things I'm saying won't always line up with what's on screen. That's just the nature of reviewing something this explicit on YouTube. Episode 1. Alright, so this video is going to be overwhelmingly negative, but I have to give credit where it's due. The opening scene is absolutely incredible. Like, genuinely, I can't imagine it being done any better than this. The series opens on a shot of the white ceiling, panning down to a back shot of Keisuke as soft piano music starts to play. It then cuts back and forth between relatively tame things such as a logo or the main cast standing around, and a close-up scene of one of the girls being violently executed via electric chair. All the while, a female voice calmly exposits the basic rules of the game as you hear the girl's muffled screams of pain. Then it jumps back just a few minutes to show how she got there. She was part of the main group, but when she refused to participate in the game, she disappeared, only to reappear strapped to the chair where she shortly after died. An absolutely incredible scene that really hooks the viewer and sets the dark and fucked up tone of the story to come. But it's all downhill from here. We then skip immediately to the first H scene of the series. I'm pretty sure this scene is meant to be either in Keisuke's head or as a flash forward to much later in the timeline. Or it could be neither. They play pretty fast and loose with the whole making sense thing, even more so than the visual novel, which itself has a very cryptic plot. But this scene has Keisuke walking into a classroom to find one of the other girls, Kanae, on the desks with her arms bound behind her back. Important context that the adaptation only ever briefly mentions is that she's his childhood friend. Keisuke proceeds to torment her, do some BDSM stuff to her, and aggressively take her virginity. All the while, she is clearly not into it, and he's going full anime villain on her. Once he's finished, he seemingly regains his head and screams at a silhouette of his boner. Yes, really. I'll show a more censored version of it now because you just have to see this. It's hilarious. They were trying to showcase how Keisuke is freaking out about his fetish coming to light, but it just ended up being funny. We then jump back to where we were before, with a scene straight out of the visual novel. Keisuke is looking at his classmate's corpse, horrified at the situation, but also unwillingly aroused. Another girl, Nemu, takes advantage, gropes Keisuke, acts like a psychopath, and proceeds to threaten to reveal Keisuke's secret if he doesn't do what she says. She then makes him kiss her, knowing that Kanae will walk in and see them, which she uses to torment them both. Pretty solidly done scene, pretty much a one-to-one from the visual novel, and even though the adaptation never actually utilizes any of the stuff it sets up here, as a fan of the VN, I appreciated it. We then see the start of the game alongside some exposition about how this all works. The voice from the start narrates the rules, explaining that there will be 5 trials, each one involving the door opener Keisuke and a keyhole of his choice. I personally think this whole scene was done pretty well. Even knowing everything beforehand, I was definitely invested in this exposition, and the music they used really amped up the tension. I don't know if I'll be able to play it here or not, so you may just have to take my word on this one. In the visual novel, you decide which route to go on based on who you pick for the trials. Obviously, the adaptation can't really do that, so Keisuke starts out the first trial by picking Nemu. Makes sense in this context since he'd want to get back at her. The two are led into a room alone where they're given a leather BDSM harness with the instructions in bright red on the wall. Keyhole, vagina. Times to ejaculate, twice. Method, hard. While the scene ultimately ends up devolving into a pretty standard H scene all things considered, one thing I do like about it is that as Keisuke is standing there processing everything, Nemu giggles and says, "So that's the key? You need to use that to fuck me, right?" Of course, once again, the adaptation absolutely fails to pay off on any of this character work, but it really does sell the creepy glee that she's having as part of this game and how she's embracing everything as opposed to Keisuke's conflicted feelings. And then of course, if you've read the entire visual novel, you know exactly why she's acting the way she's acting, and it adds even more layers to everything. So at this point, I'm actually having a pretty good time with this show. The rest of the episode is the resulting H scene, which, much like the first, is not all that extreme. It's really just semi-rough BDSM sex. Before long, Keisuke starts to get into it and have a good time, while Nemu is having a good time start to finish despite being a virgin prior. But they're having fun. Keisuke fucks her stupid, and the last thing we see is what the rest of the cast has been watching on a set of monitors. Of course, the adaptation never actually does anything with that dynamic, but we're just gonna have to get used to it. So despite the adaptation overall being utter dog shit, I actually think that the first episode is pretty decent. It does have a bit of sloppiness, like with that first H scene coming out of nowhere plus the boner scream, but at this point in my watch through, I'm thinking that I've definitely seen worse and was pleasantly surprised. Episode 2 starts out immediately after the last, with Nemu calling in her second favor before the two are reunited with the group. "I want you to choose me and only me from now on." We then get a little more exposition, with the voice explaining that they passed. The first of 5 doors opens, and a 10-minute timer starts, noting how long it'll be before the next trial. Then there's a surprisingly decent scene that very quickly showcases the overall group dynamic and each individual's role within it. The teacher Natsuki is trying to be the adult and keep everyone calm. Nemu is embracing the game and recommends simply playing it as intended. Rine wants to proactively strategize to actually try to overcome the game rather than simply taking things as they come. Rika is scared and wants to try to escape, at which point Nemu torments her, telling her she'll die, and Kanae becomes all motherly and protective towards Rika. Natsuki then de-escalates and they disperse. The whole scene lasts about a minute, but it does a pretty solid job of showcasing their baseline personalities, and I feel like if the overall product was better, I would be heaping so much praise on this scene for how well and how quickly it establishes the personalities of an ensemble cast. Afterwards, Kanae asks about Keisuke's kiss with Nemu and offers herself as a trial partner moving forward before the conversation is cut off by the timer, forcing them to rush to the start point for the second trial. I do like the scenes of Keisuke picking out the keyhole because it has him facing the others in a line, the piano music starts playing, the voice counts down from 30, and he just runs through everything in his head as he tries to decide who he's going to torment. This time he opts to not bow to Nemu's demands and instead picks Kanae. Now in the visual novel, each route is picked by picking the same girl for every trial. Mixing it up just gives you a common route with an unsatisfying ending. Obviously, the adaptation can't exactly do that, especially with the low episode count, and it also has to figure out a way to include H scenes with all the girls. To that end, I think this is a decent enough way to get Kanae in the trial room. Keisuke wants to rebel against Nemu, and Kanae volunteers because in her words, she wants him to rely on her as well. It's a little clunky, but they did okay with what they had to work with. The two enter the trial, and the instructions are on the wall again. Keyhole, vagina. Ejaculations, 1. Method, hard. Naturally, it's time for the next H scene. This time the equipment is simply a coil of rope. Before I talk about this scene, I want to explain my experience watching this series. I went in knowing very little, though I had heard that the adaptation is terrible even by visual novel anime adaptation standards. But here's the thing. As someone who absolutely loves the visual novel, the first 2 episodes of the adaptation are actually pretty decent. Nothing particularly amazing, mind you, but definitely way better than I was expecting. It's really not until the second half of the series where things start to seriously spiral. And this scene right here is one of the reasons that I initially thought that this show was gonna be decent. Now, much like the scene in episode 1, this one is relatively tame all things considered. being tied up is about as vanilla as BDSM gets. But what's different is that unlike Nemu, Kanae is definitely not having a good time, and Keisuke latches onto that. He really starts to enjoy himself and revels in the fact that Kanae is scared, hurting, and completely at his mercy. While the adaptation never explicitly states that this is a fetish of Keisuke's, and while he is a fundamentally moral person, he does enjoy the situation despite himself. And this scene really does a great job of showcasing that. Kanae is clearly miserable, and Keisuke very quickly goes full anime villain with the evil grin and the aggressively creepy internal monologue. And afterwards, he calms down a bit and the guilt starts to set in. He hurt someone he cares about, and he realizes that things are only going to get more and more depraved. There's even one point where he thinks, if it goes any further, I might not forgive myself, Kanae. It wouldn't be right at all. Only as he's saying that, text flashes on screen saying, if it goes any further, I might not mind it. And he begins fantasizing about some of the things he might get to do to Kanae. That is exactly the kind of thing I love about the driving conflict of Euphoria. This man is being dragged into darkness, and he is terrified of the fact that part of him really does want it. Man, outside of the opening scene in episode 1, this is pretty much where the adaptation peaked. I fucking love it. Now of course, Nemu picks up on this internal conflict because she seems to understand Keisuke better than he understands himself. There's a reason for this, but you'll have to read the visual novel if you want it to make sense. But anyway, she decides to torment him while also trying to push him to accept the darkness. It's clearly working as he temporarily blacks out and starts throttling Nemu, and probably would have killed her if Kanae hadn't snapped him out of it. And of course, Nemu gives an iconic line from the visual novel. Dying is the highest form of ecstasy. This interaction is one of those ones that takes on a whole new meaning once you've 100%ed the visual novel, and it hits even in the adaptation. Though sadly, the adaptation never really gives the viewer any of the good story stuff, so this scene will never have any deeper meaning to the hentai onlys. But as a VN fan, that was awesome. After that, there's a montage of Keisuke picking Kanae for the various trials, and notably, this is the first real instance of the writers arbitrarily changing things from the visual novel without a real reason to. It starts out pretty small, with one of the montage scenes originally featuring a different girl. But I want you to keep in mind that this is where it started because it's going to be an absolute clusterfuck. Then there's another full-length trial scene, before which Kanae confesses her love to Keisuke. This trial is electrical torture. Kanae gets a bunch of clamps, wires, diodes, and vibrators attached to and inside her and must endure progressively greater levels of electrical current. She advances a level whenever she says it feels good and must go through every level before it can end. She's pushed to the point of nearly breaking before it's over, and of course, Keisuke has his way with all 3 of her orifices once the electricity is done. This scene is notable for actually starting to get pretty fucked up, whereas the ones before were fairly tame all things considered, not counting the montage. And then Keisuke actually helps clean her up while reassuring her, like, what the fuck, there's aftercare going on here? And apparently that was the final trial, so hand in hand, they start to walk out of the facility as the last door opens and the credits roll. Now, there's also a weird-ass post-credit scene. I'm going to try to explain this in a way that won't spoil anything for those of you who haven't read the visual novel, because I really do not want to ruin it for you guys. But this scene starts out as the dog ending from the true route, with the girl being swapped with a different character. It then pans to the results of the secondary set of trials that the adaptation completely skips over, though it very clearly shows that at least one of these trials was failed. Which, by the way, is completely incompatible with the true route for a variety of reasons. And then Kanae is thrown into the mix, being pretty much in the same position as Keisuke. Really, this was a sign of things to come. It only gets more and more incoherent from here, and it's already pretty bad, even as a visual novel fan who knows what each element is supposed to do. Episode 2 was decent overall, but oh man, that post-credit scene was a mess, and while the next episode isn't completely awful, there's no more episodes that I'd consider actually good. Episode 3 starts out with a cold open that's a clear nod to the multi-route structure of the visual novel, with a mysterious voice saying, "I wonder what would have happened had you opted for a different choice," followed by a shot from behind of one of the girls dying via guillotine. It then goes straight back into Keisuke picking someone for a trial, so clearly it's doing an alternate timeline thing. This time Keisuke gets irked by the fact that Rine is so calm despite the circumstances, and he picks her out of a desire to see her stoicism break. The rules of this trial: vagina, 2, hard. The equipment: ropes and a cloth gag. The H scene is pretty simple stuff, much like we've seen before. Keisuke aggressively deflowers her, she's clearly not having a good time, and he's enjoying the fact that she's not having a good time. The one notable thing here is that it's a lot bloodier than the other scenes. Afterward, Rine recovers her stoicism and simply gets up and nonchalantly walks to the shower despite all the various fluids dripping out of her. After cleaning up, she reveals that she's pretty much figured out Keisuke's demons and offers herself for future trials, indicating a desire to be a participant. Then of course, Nemu tells Keisuke to keep picking her. So far, so good. I don't think the start of this episode is anywhere near as good as the last two, but it's okay. Rine's route was my favorite of the non-true routes at the VN, so it's a shame that they're really not doing it justice, but I don't completely hate it. So then there's another trial. This time it's... how do I put this without getting a strike? It's all about turning Rine into a size queen, featuring a fists-on approach at the end. She's in clear distress during all this, but like before, calms down immediately afterwards. But then we get what's probably my favorite exchange in the series, though I'll admit it's probably because I liked Rine's route so much in the visual novel. Can you forgive me for all the things I've done and for the things I'm about to do? Of course, the beast that resides within you must have been putting a lot of stress on your conscience. However, you must not forget, the pain that your beast will inflict will be important to me. Man, the adaptation only ever kind of goes into why Rine is so damaged. I mean, the final episode focuses on it, but it's not done well. But I absolutely loved the dynamic of Keisuke the sadist and Rine, who is not truly a masochist like Nemu, but seeks out suffering as a means of atoning for an unknown sin. It's pretty much the best case scenario for Keisuke because he gets to make someone truly suffer, and that person truly desires suffering as opposed to getting enjoyment from it. Then the adaptation decides to do the bonus game, which is something that appears in every route of the visual novel, where if two people complete an optional trial, they get a high quality meal and get to sleep in a luxurious bed. And there's always some character work accompanying this bit. In the adaptation, Keisuke is paired with Rine. The bonus game is more vanilla than the typical trials, with only mildly kinky things like water sports and a facial. Nothing crazy by Euphoria standards. To make a long story short, they talk, agree to start a real relationship, and then proceed to have a shit ton of loving vanilla sex, and Rine mentions that Keisuke taught her both pleasure and pain. There was very little build up to this emotional moment, and so far there was no indication that they even like each other as people. It worked in the visual novel, but it just kinda happened unprompted in the adaptation, and that's a shame because again, I really liked Rine's route in the visual novel, and the adaptation just does not do it justice. And also, Keisuke fucks her to the point of babbling incoherence, which I just found kind of uncomfortable and not in the way the series is supposed to be. It was just weird, like a more stereotypical hentai. Rine also has a PTSD nightmare and starts throttling Keisuke as the credits roll. There's another post-credit scene that's more of the weird combination of route elements from before, except this time Rine is also there, heavily pregnant and referencing the cult storyline that won't really come back until the final episode. And I should mention that this too is completely incompatible with the true route scene being referenced, not to mention that the swapped characters also don't make any sense to a VN reader. It's clear to me that the writers were desperately trying to incorporate stuff from the visual novel, but didn't really have a solid idea of how exactly to do that in a way that would fit the medium and the runtime. It definitely didn't work, but at this point in my viewing, I had assumed that they would essentially do a series of what-ifs, showing the beginning portion of every route, more or less skipping the second half of the non-true routes, and then slapping together an ending loosely based on one of the bad endings, or possibly leaving it ambiguous. That wouldn't be the best thing ever, but it would at least make sense and be somewhat coherent. At least if I were the director and had a 6-episode limit, that's what I would have done. Clearly, even at this point, I was overestimating this thing. Episode 3 is where the cracks first start to show. The next episode doesn't quite descend into full-on batshit territory, but the cracks definitely widen. Let's take a look. Episode 4 starts by bringing us back to the keyhole selection. This time, Keisuke chooses Rika, though notably his internal monologue doesn't even have him giving a justification for it, only that he needs to pick someone or everyone dies. Rika's clearly not happy about this decision. Then it jumps back again to the last 5 seconds of the selection and he chooses Natsuki, though her reaction is different. She's not grateful, but considers it the best case scenario as she's the adult and should protect the students as much as possible. She also expresses that she doesn't blame Keisuke and that he's as much a victim as the rest of them. And as the title card does its thing, I could already tell that this was going to get a little fucky because they're basically trying to squish 2 routes into 1 episode. But of course, we immediately get a Rika H scene. This is the waterboarding scene straight out of the visual novel, and I don't really have all that much to say. Rika is a very emotionally childish character, and she's easily the most terrified of anyone before and during the scene. A fact that Keisuke is clearly enjoying, and she actively asks Keisuke to not do the trial even though she logically knows that it's that or death. It's also worth noting that this is arguably the most dangerous scene so far. While the rest have been varying degrees of painful and uncomfortable, this one could have actually drowned Rika if Keisuke screwed up, and she actually did come extremely close to passing out at the end. Afterwards, there's a scene that's very interesting but ultimately does not get properly explored, which annoys me because the visual novel very much does do interesting things with Rika's character. But Rika is upset and clearly has difficulty processing her emotions after this traumatic event. She tries to logic it through in again a very childish manner, at one point saying that she could have potentially dealt with it if he said he loved her. He confronts her on this logic until she eventually says what she's really thinking. "I don't want to think of you as a terrible person, Senpai." Definitely a neat dynamic going on here, as she probably had a neutral or possibly even positive opinion of him before all this, and is now being forced to confront that with the added difficulty of realizing that Keisuke is not here of his own free will either. After that, there's an obligatory Nemu torment scene. I initially thought they handled Nemu pretty well, all things considered, though by this point she's becoming very one-note and it's pretty clear that they aren't going to properly pay off any of the setup they've been doing. This scene doesn't last very long because the writers clearly want to get us to another H scene. This time, he picks Natsuki, and through visual storytelling, they frame it as the stereotypical high schooler fantasizes about his hot teacher motivation. This is another bog-standard bondage scene, and I really don't have much to say about it because it ultimately does nothing unique story-wise. It then immediately jumps to another Rika scene that also does nothing interesting. It seems like the fetish for this one is just a swimsuit. Like, there isn't even really any BDSM element to talk about besides Keisuke being pretty rough and Rika having to say some mildly demeaning things, even though she's clearly very upset. There is an interesting bit where Keisuke is performing the aftercare, helping her clean up and holding the ice pack to her forehead while she's trying to process everything, and says a line that is once again never properly explored in the adaptation. "I don't understand at all. Why are you both good and bad to me at the same time?" Of course, then it does a ham-fisted soliloquy to explain Rika's internal character motivation, where she outright explains that she likes being simple because it makes life easy. In the visual novel, there's actually like real character work leading up to this explanation. Then we've got another Natsuki age scene. They're really packing them in, huh? There's not a whole lot for me to even talk about this episode because it's just overwhelmingly H scenes. I mean, it is a hentai, so that's to be expected, but I mean, come on. This is another scene from straight out of the visual novel, and it's the age play scene where Keisuke dresses her as a baby and feeds her muscle relaxants and laxatives. Though it does cut between the H scene and a scene of Natsuki comforting Keisuke through a spell of self-loathing right after her last H scene. Afterwards, there's a 30-minute break and they randomly introduce the escape hole from the visual novel. This was briefly hinted at in the previous episode, but it didn't look like they were planning on doing anything with it. Rin stays behind to figure things out, the rest leave. Rika injures herself, Keisuke carries her on his back, Kanae fucks off to serve as a distraction for the people who are apparently chasing them now. And here's where things start to get a little weird. The remaining cast is cornered by 4 dudes in lab coats. Natsuki kicks ass and accuses Nemu of being part of the organization, and basically masterminding the whole thing before ostensibly shooting her. It happens off screen, so it's only implied. It's then explained via narration that the military came in and cleaned things up, and Keisuke woke up on a beach with Natsuki and Rika. Natsuki explains that Rin and Kanae were successfully rescued. Now, this is a clear reference to the end of Natsuki's route in the visual novel, though it's kind of weird that Rika's here, and of course, they did skip the second half of the non-true routes to get here. But they very quickly make it, well, it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I understand why they did it now because they immediately pivot into a threesome scene with Keisuke, Natsuki, and Rika. It then ends with a shot of the 2 women pregnant as the credits roll. No extra scene this time. It's kinda wild. Everything starts coming off the rails entirely with this episode. They squished 2 routes together, randomly started throwing in some of the overarching narrative that had until this point been completely ignored, threw in some baseline character work that could have possibly been good had it been developed in any way, and then just threw in a fucking beach threesome that very much did not happen in the VN. And it's funny because the beach in Natsuki's ending was meant to be cryptic and confusing. You're supposed to be left with questions in the visual novel. In fact, the whole point of the visual novel is that each ending answers some of the questions you have, and it's not until the true route that you learn the full story. And even then, there are several bad endings on that route. So I understand what they were referencing with Natsuki's badassery, the military stuff, even the Nemu accusation, even though that particular scene didn't happen in the VN. But it's all just becoming a clusterfuck, and it's especially confusing given that they so far have just excised a substantial part of the main plot, so the hentai onlys are surely completely lost at this point. Oh, and trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. These last 2 episodes are off the fucking wall. Episode 5 incorporates a lot of true route plot beats. If you haven't read the VN, basically none of it will make sense, so you're probably good to stick around, but it's borderline. If you haven't read the VN, you may want to skip this section of the video. If I remember, I'll put a timestamp on screen now, or you can just use the chapters on the video or the timestamps in the description. Episode 5 starts out with Keisuke waking up on a cot, clearly having received some rudimentary medical care, and Nemu is beside him. In the visual novel, this is the part where Keisuke and whichever girl's route he's on are in the survival bunker immediately following their escape from the facility. Of course, the adaptation skipped over the second arc of the facility, and in the previous episode, Nemu got fucking shot, so the audience is probably confused even though they established a multiple timelines thing earlier. A quick flashback slideshow plus exhibition revealed that Keisuke collapsed, and after finding the bunker, the girls all went scouting except for Nemu, who stayed behind to care for Keisuke. None have yet returned. Nemu also references some stuff from the second half of the facility, which the adaptation did not show or even explain, by the way. And of course, they fuck. I mean, in the VN, this part of the story does include an H scene, but like all the vanilla scenes from the VN, this was meant for character work, and at this point, Keisuke and whichever girl he's with had bonded to a degree where this scene is meant to be a physical marker of their changing relationship. But of course, we did not see that with Nemu in the adaptation, and it's even more important with her because of the complex and layered dynamic she has with Keisuke. So this is just an H scene with a Nemu that's a completely different character. But yeah, gotta get the audience off, I guess. With Keisuke recovered, the two make their way to the high school. The facility is actually really close to the school, a big revelation in the VN that's pretty much glossed over here. They find that everything is a shit show and that many of the students are passing the time by engaging in carnal activities with less than willing partners. At the top of the social ladder, it's none other than Kanae. She proceeds to give an anime villain speech explaining that she set up this current situation and she was behind everything. Okay, so this is a significant deviation from the visual novel that incorporates certain ideas from other parts of the visual novel. Like, for example, in the VN, the clusterfuck at the school is an extension of the games in the facility, and everyone is still ultimately beholden to the mysterious organizers, as opposed to the adaptation where it's Kanae who decides to encourage this social dynamic. Also, I know exactly why they decided to make Kanae have this heel turn, but even with tons of additional context from the visual novel, it makes absolutely no sense for this scene to play out this way. And actually, having that context makes it worse, because other things that they've shown in previous episodes, specifically those two post-credit scenes, actually conflict with what they're trying to do here. I remember watching this and it was like a light bulb went off. They have no fucking idea where they want to go with this story. None at all. And with only 2 episodes left, they wouldn't really have much luck even with a plan. Kanae captures them and presents Keisuke with a challenge. He must kill either Nemu or her. If he kills Nemu, she'll let everyone go. If he kills Kanae, she won't exactly be in a position to stop him from leaving. Again, this is a case of, I see why they're doing this, but the way they're going about it makes no sense. They're pulling ideas from the visual novel with basically no effort into making it make sense. And that's on top of the issues that arose with the story in the previous scene. Everything is falling apart. Keisuke refuses to choose to kill either of them, and Kanae reveals that she's been living a lie for as long as she's known him. And while I do not like how they're doing basically anything with the writing, I do think that Kanae's presentation in this scene is pretty great. The monologue plus the VA's delivery do a great job of selling her as this person who was able to successfully hide her crazy for years, only to finally let it out at her moment of triumph. It's one of those things that really made me sad that the adaptation turned out like this, because I could see flashes of brilliance here, and I feel like this could have been good under different circumstances. Since Keisuke won't kill anyone, Kanae puts him and Nemu into timeout in one of the classrooms, where they quickly agree that there isn't much they can do at the moment except play it by ear. I will say that as a VN fan, despite everything going to shit, this section of the story is just completely different from the VN, so I found myself engaged just because I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. Again, it's hard to explain without spoilers, but the ideas they introduce make sense to me. But the way they're going about it gives off a very clear message that it will not work unless they continue changing things. So this scene with Kanae running the school and Keisuke trapped with Nemu and forming a bond, it doesn't happen like this in the VN. Everything it's trying to do was accomplished in a different way, so it's fascinating if nothing else. Though my heart does go out to the hentai onlys because they're probably just sitting there wondering why in the fuck they're supposed to like Nemu now and why in the fuck she's not acting like a total bitch anymore. Nemu tries to convince Keisuke to kill her, and then he proceeds to angrily fuck her. No, it does not make a whole lot of sense. They were probably just trying to showcase him starting to lose his sanity, but it kinda came out of nowhere. Kanae brings them back out the next day, and this time she fucking kills Rika, Rine, and Natsuke by just Thanos snapping their heads. It's so abrupt that I couldn't help but find it kinda hilarious. To be clear, this does not happen like this in the VN at all. This isn't even one of those they switched up the characters things that happened multiple times throughout the show. It's kinda hilarious because it sort of breaks the story, and it especially breaks what I initially thought they were gonna do, which would be the Brood ending from the VN, where Keisuke embraces his demons. No idea why they didn't decide to include it, because I think it would have been the least bad choice given all this fuckery. But yeah, the rest of the main cast is now dead for basically zero reason. Oh, and Keisuke references the games from the second half of the facility, complete with still frame flashbacks. You know, those games that they decided not to adapt, that they skipped over in their entirety? Keisuke asks what was the point of surviving those games, and anyone who hasn't read the VN has no idea what the fuck he's talking about, or why Keisuke is having memories of Rine in a guillotine or punching Nemu in the face. The only good thing I can say about this is that it might convince someone to read the visual novel, and that's always a plus. The next time Kanae brings them back, she decides it's time for Nemu to suffer if Keisuke won't make a decision. This time, it's the tubes scene. Now, tubes is easily the most extreme scene in the original visual novel. Like, it provoked a physical reaction in me, and when I eventually get around to a reread, I will be skipping that scene because I do not want to experience it again. I'm not even going to go into detail about what it is because I'm concerned about TOS stuff. Suffice it to say that it involves orifices being connected via tubes. Well, the adaptation doesn't do it in quite the same way. Instead, they give it a human centipede flair. Kanae then jacks Keisuke off while he's involuntarily enjoying it. Then there's a random flashback of Keisuke as a kid in a cave with a young girl, though it cuts off before she introduces herself. After that, I assume this is the next day since Nemu isn't unconscious, though they don't actually say one way or another. Kanae instructs her subordinates to violate Nemu while Keisuke watches and gets sucked off by Kanae. Keisuke then gets the crazy person eyes, and it immediately cuts to a scene of Keisuke violating some random student while Nemu is continuing to be violated. If this is starting to sound all weird and disjointed, that's because it is. Kanae also fucks Keisuke. And then there's a mini montage of Keisuke fucking random schoolgirls, Nemu getting violated, and Keisuke getting beaten with bats and 2x4s. Then more flashbacks to the facility games they skipped over before Keisuke wakes up in the classroom screaming from a nightmare. No, I'm not just going rapid fire through all this as a rhetorical device, it's actually like this when you watch the show. Keisuke is clearly losing his mind at this point and decides that logically it would make sense to kill Kanae since she's clearly not the person he knows. Nemu then apologizes to him and sucks him off before fucking him. Impressively, she manages to deliver a monologue with a cock in her mouth. But basically, Nemu says that she's probably the reason why he's in the situation and that he's important to her even if he doesn't remember. No, they really do not expand on that at all. The next day, Kanae gives them another beating before injecting them with powerful aphrodisiacs. Naturally, they immediately start fucking. Midway through, Keisuke has a flashback of them fucking in the classroom from before the events of the story, and they reveal that the little girl in the cave was actually Nemu. Then, classroom memory Nemu screams, "Why didn't you kill me?" which is an amazing line in the visual novel that makes no fucking sense in this context. Back in the present, drugged up Keisuke continues fucking Nemu and ends up breaking her neck. She thanks him as she dies, and fuck me, that just shows that the writers have no idea what Euphoria is all about. Having Keisuke do this while his mind is chemically altered completely destroys the thematic element to what they're trying to do, alongside a few other decisions that just break things here. Having this scene play out this way was so profoundly disappointing because it really hit home that they didn't understand the original story, so there was no real chance of them properly respecting it. They then play the ending to the true route from the VN with an extra added H scene mixed with flashbacks of Keisuke and Nemu as children. I'm not going to say what that is because I really do not want to spoil it, especially since they skipped 95% of the events in the true route, so spoiling the very end would just be even more cruel. So after the H scene, it ends off on the same note as the true ending of the true route of the VN. So I guess that's how they're ending the show, right? Nope, there's still another fucking episode. Do I even need to conclude with my thoughts on this episode? Clusterfuck. Absolute clusterfuck. They're pulling from the visual novel seemingly at random and trying their damnedest to make it make sense, but they are not succeeding. Let's see what happens next. Episode 6 cold opens on a flashback of an H scene with a mysterious woman who we have not yet seen. It only lasts a few seconds before transitioning back to the bunker H scene from the previous episode, only this time it's Kanae instead of Nemu. It then kinda flips back and forth between the memory H scene and the bunker scene. Keisuke then passes the fuck out and wakes up on the cot with Rine taking care of him. They have a brief conversation before we see that Rine has that mysterious woman's necklace in her hands. Keisuke and Rine make it to the school, and it's a repeat of the last episode with all the unsanctioned extracurricular activities, though this time it's Nemu at the helm instead of Kanae, who she has captured. Nemu tells Keisuke to violate Rine or she'll have it done to Kanae. Rine tells him to do it, and there's another H scene. Nemu is about to go back on her word, but then the cult shows up. They beat up the students, and the immediate crisis is averted. What cult, you ask? Yeah, that was a whole thing in the visual novel. The adaptation just kind of plops them in there. It was weird in the VN, and the lack of context in the adaptation just makes it even weirder. Especially since so much of that relies on character stuff from Rine's route. Okay, fair warning, this next bit is going to spoil stuff from the visual novel. As long as this icon is on screen, you may want to keep it on mute if you haven't read the VN. Turns out, Rine is the leader of the cult and is wearing the same outfit as the mysterious woman. The collars that have been controlling Keisuke and the girls are removed, and the cult captures Nemu and frees Kanae. Nemu is then forcibly branded and violated as a means of expelling the devil inside her. Rine reveals that this ritual lasts 3 days and takes Keisuke into a room with her where, mid-H scene, she reveals that her mother once did the same thing to Keisuke as a child, with the purpose of giving birth to the savior who would bring them to paradise. However, the savior needs to be male, and instead she gave birth to Rine, a failure. And just to be clear, that means that yes, Rine is Keisuke's daughter, and she is currently forcing him to impregnate her. Keisuke realizes that shit's kinda fucked, so he tells Kanae to get out of Dodge while he figures things out. Rine then doses Keisuke with aphrodisiacs and proceeds to have a train of cult ladies bang Keisuke in a very weird and creepy H scene. They then show the men in the cult engaging in flagellation to purge their sins. And more cult orgies. Keisuke ultimately gives up and starts fucking Rine without taking the drugs. We then get a pregnant H scene, and Keisuke finds an opportunity to take her as a hostage and use her to escape. Rine ends up leading Keisuke to a facility in the so-called Door to Paradise. Turns out this paradise is an abandoned facility of some sort. Rine goes a little bit crazy at this point. You know, as if she was totally sane before all this. She gives birth right there and then, and there's a still frame montage of them living a normal family life with their new daughter. No, they do not explain how they get from Rine wailing in despair to this. You may be able to guess what's going on, but it makes much more sense in the VN. There's one more H scene for good luck, and then we see the cult with Rika and Natsuki at the helm, and we also see that Keisuke and Rine's daughter did some drawings that just so happened to be the logo for the games at the very beginning. And that's how it ends. A cryptic cliffhanger that doesn't actually point to anything in the visual novel. And we know this adaptation isn't ever getting a sequel, so I guess we just have to speculate on what they were trying to do. I do find it interesting how they made the cult storyline the big ultimate thing that was at the center of everything, even if they never actually explained anything about the BDSM games. It's interesting because in the VN, that plotline is not really a red herring, but it definitely toes that line in that there's an even bigger thing than that going on. But more than anything, it's clear that the adaptation had completely lost the plot at that point, and they were just desperately trying to shove in every VN plot point that they can in the hopes that they can make something entertaining. And I mean, it is entertaining in a sense, in the same way that watching a dumpster fire fueled by dead puppies could be entertaining. It's like, look at how we fucked with something that was so good initially. Euphoria is a fantastic visual novel, and admittedly adapting it into a series was going to be an uphill battle no matter what due to the nature of it. But I am amazed at how thoroughly everything fell apart pretty much as soon as they left the facility. And I mean, how could it not? The whole point of the school stuff was to be insane and cryptic, requiring going through multiple routes to even start to understand what's going on before the true route punches you in the face with answers. If I was the director and given such a short runtime to work with, I would have cut all that stuff out entirely. The first 2 episodes were decent, and episode 3 was serviceable. Instead of even attempting the school or cult stuff, I'd have instead adapted the rest of the facility games before pivoting into an original ending. Probably with them all escaping or one of them being outed as the villain. It wouldn't have done the VN justice, but it could have worked to a degree. Instead, we get this total mess of a show that ultimately just makes me miss the visual novel. If you're a fan of the visual novel, I would recommend the first and maybe second episodes. That opening scene in episode 1 is fantastic and absolutely gets my recommendation. But it all goes downhill from there, and by the end, I was just frustrated. If you haven't read the VN, I'd say maybe the first 3 episodes are worth watching, though you'll be completely lost beyond that point. And with how they handled certain plot beats, parts of the VN could actually be spoiled for you without any of the good that those plot beats were trying to do. So I would say skip the second half of the show and just read the visual novel. I'd heard this show is bad, and yeah, it's really bad. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my members, especially my $10 member, Bulk Squat Thrust. Members got this video early, so if you'd like that, click the join button down below. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more in the future. I got more stuff in the works. The big videos, Sengoku Rants and Mushoku Tensei, are still a ways away, but I've got other stuff coming as well. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the Electro Swing.